Welcome to Commander Central, episode 2 of 42, and today we're going to pick our 5 favorite cards from Kaldheim. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
How is everyone doing this beautiful Friday afternoon?
I guess I'm good.
We're all surviving.
I'm pretty good. I think before we dig in, I have to ask, have either of you watched WandaVision yet?
Yes, we watched the first two because the first two were out the first night, Friday night. So that's going to be that will replace The Mandalorian as our Friday night TV series. My wife and I watch.
Gotcha. What about you, Chris?
And I liked it quite a bit.
I have not yet. I'm waiting until there's quite a few of them so that I can just sit down and kind of binge them.
Sure.
Gotcha. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I watched the first two multiple times over the course of last weekend just because it's a Marvel thing. You miss the little nods and Easter eggs all over the place. So really looking forward to this week's episode.
And my son is at the age, he's 13 now, so he's still young enough that like he finds like silly slapstick humor from old sitcoms funny. So the goofy jokes that were in it from like, you know, Dick Van Dyke series
stuff,
joke stuff. Yeah, like the Nick at Night level comedy. He still is young enough that he like finds people falling down like that funny. He's not like he's 17 where he's too cool to laugh at something silly from an old TV show. So that part still held up well enough for him that he enjoyed it.
So me being in my early 30s, if I laugh at that stuff, is it because I actually watch those shows on Nick at Night, or I'm a horrible person for laughing at someone falling down?
Well, that's the thing I wonder, because I think we're all at that age where we have a bit of a framework. Like, we didn't obviously grow up when that stuff was on the air, but there were still things like Nick at Night and like things like the reruns that you watched on TV, right? And I don't know if that's a thing that people do today. I don't think kids, there's so many options, whether it's like just watching YouTube or watching Twitch. I don't think they come home from school and watch something on TV after school or watch Nick at Night or something at night. I don't think they have that frame of reference maybe we have for some of that old stuff.
I don't know anyone who still has cable aside from like my in-laws.
Yeah, right.
Everyone else has got streaming services, so
yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chris. I can say the same. I think my dad has cable. Otherwise, everyone I know has streaming services, or they pay for like Hulu Live, which is a limited bundle of cable, but it's still probably cheaper than your local cable provider.
Yeah, we have that special box thing that I have hanging in my window so I can get the local channels.
The open air antenna.
Yeah.
Nice.
Just because sometimes you need the local news. Something's going on.
Sure,
Sirens are going off outside, and you're like, oh no, what's happening?
My dad still says the best picture is the open air high def broadcast of NBC Sunday Night Football. It's the best picture he can get. I'm like, well, good for you. I just watched the highlights on ESPN.
I just turn on Amazon Prime and they show me the football games. So, I mean.
Right, yeah. So we didn't really get a chance to play any games, or I guess we did, but like we're kind of recording a couple shows back to back here, and we covered the couple we played already, so we have nothing to really get into there. But before we get into the social media thing, one thing I want to quick talk about here is the show we're going to do here today. So instead of doing a full Kaldheim review, we've each picked 5 cards we like, and we're going to talk about them. And the reason that is we always kind of struggle a little bit with this type of show. At this point, there's a gazillion EDH podcasts out there, and all do a set review show. So like during like the 2-week window after a set comes out, if you want to listen to 25 different set reviews, you can go do that. And that makes it kind of challenging to do something that has much value over what the next show is doing, particularly when you have places like, Legendary Creature podcast does a really nice review show that takes like 3 hours, where they, assign a card to a Patreon supporter and everyone does like a little 5-minute deep dive on it. There's really no way to compete with that level of depth. Command Zone does multiple shows oftentimes on a set review, and they have a research staff so they can do super deep dives as well. EDH Recast, when we do those shows, we have data we can actually have access about like what cards are getting played. Brainstorm Brewery can talk about finance. Everybody else, us included, on this show, it's tough to do something that's kind of unique and gives you a unique spin on a set review. So this time what we decided to do was just each pick 5 cards we liked individually and talk about them. So we're not trying to cram 40 cards into an hour. But as far as feedback is concerned, we're kind of curious what you guys think of this approach when all is said and done. We'd like to hear if you prefer the old school, just review the set in mass, or if you like this kind of a little more focused approach, or if you have some ideas out there for what to do next time, we'd be open to that as well. We're just trying to kind of shake it up a little bit and find a way to do something that's a little interesting. So if you wanted to reach out and tell us your thoughts on that, how would you go about doing that, Chris?
Well, you can reach us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can reach out to us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can find us on Facebook by searching CMDR Central. You can find us online at cmdrcentral.com, and you can also find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central and check out our reward tiers, such as the Decks You Play shows, our guest spot on an episode. This week we want to say thank you to 2 new patrons, Christopher Kerbin and Rekda Telembar.
Thank you very much to the 2 new Patreons and for everyone else who continues to support us. We really do appreciate it. I believe next week we have a show that will be coming out where we have one of our Patreon supporters on as a guest. So that is one of the options for a Patreon tier. But if all you can do to support us is just listen to the show and subscribe or like or thumbs up on whatever podcast mechanism you use, we appreciate that as well. Any help at all helps us out, and it means a lot to us for keeping the show functioning and just making us know that you appreciate what we do. All right, should we dive right into this since we're going to have, I believe, 15 cards to talk about here?
Sure. So before we start, I don't know if this card's on your guys' list.
Okay.
But as I talked about, I do believe this is probably a month ago on our homework cards, it was. I said I don't look at spoilers until it's completely spoiled.
Okay.
Like I try not to look at anything. So one of these cards I was looking at as I was doing my notes, and I died laughing because I didn't realize it was in this set. And that is, how about a Tybalt Cosmic Imposter? Like I'm sitting here, I'm reading the front side of it, which is Valky, God of Lies. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. I'm like, flip it. I'm like, Tybalt, what? So I had to put that out there. I mean, my wife heard me. She's like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, this is just awesome.
Yeah, I mean, Valky's generally, not that the Tybalt half isn't good too, but like Valky's a really good card for 2 mana to come in and nail a creature out of everyone's hand. That's really solid. And then you can cast them too. That's a really good card.
Yeah, I was absolutely just baffled. I'm like, Tybalt's on Kaldheim? What is going on? So that was just my story. So now we can proceed where we were. I'm sorry.
All right. So what's your first card here, Chris?
My first card. Now, when I did these cards, I was looking at cards that would have like overall value for commander base.
Sure. Would
be good. Pretty much in any deck would be good for the format in general. So I chose one. This is a black card called Dream Devourer. It is 1 and a black for a 0/3 Demon Cleric. It says each non-land card in your hand without foretell has foretell. Its foretell cost is equal to its mana cost reduced by 2. So, as everyone should know, if you looked at these, if not, I'll read it to you. During your turn, you may pay 2 colorless and exile a card from your hand face down. Cast it on a later turn for its foretell cost. That's how foretell works. And then he's got another ability that says, whenever you foretell a card, Dream Devourer gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Now, I chose this card due to the simple fact that I think foretell is going to be pretty powerful in the game of Magic, specifically in Commander, where it adds another aspect to this game. It's going to add that political viewpoint where you can be like, I'm going to foretell 3 cards out here. Table knows what I have. Now they can either play around it or they can play with me, try to bribe me into doing this to kill something else if they, follow certain criteria for me. And I mean, I like the aspect of having an open-ended game where people can actually, play with each other instead of trying to play against each other.
So morphs do a similar thing. However, there's only so many morphs that do something scary when they're turned face up.
I don't think there's a whole lot of them.
Yeah. Every spell that has foretell, I mean, particularly in this case, where, the spells that have foretell just natively, they're spells. They're always going to do something useful versus just being a creature that might give your other creatures +1/+0 or something.
Yep.
It might be a removal spell. It could be a draw spell. It could be a counter. You are never going to know. You're just going to see it sitting there waiting to go off. In this case, it's not even like, well, I know there's 15 foretell spells this deck could have in it. This could be anything. You're turning like literally, it's an absolute wild card.
Yep. I also see this card with wheels. It could be kind of disgusting. You foretell all the cards out of your hand, then you wheel everybody, and it's like, I have no cards anyway, so now I just draw a whole bunch more cards, foretell all these cards, and just sit back and be like, well, this is like half my deck sitting on the table. I can cast them at any time. What you guys want to do? It
lets you split some costs up too, to make it easier to cast something a little bit earlier as well.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a real good, and it's not parasitic. Like, if you run no other foretell stuff at all, this is still good. Like, it doesn't care if there's something else that you've already played with foretell. It's just doing it all on one card right there.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Joyra, but not quite as disgusting as Joyra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So-
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good pick, Chris. Max, we'll go to you next. What's your number one card here?
Okay, so I made my top 5, and as I did this, I started my list last night, and it was super easy. Found 5 cards, and when I went to look at the set again today, just to make sure I didn't miss anything, my list went from 5 to like 20, so that wasn't fun.
Yeah, my list is massive too, bud.
But I think I really went with cards that I want to play myself. Whether they are going to go in a deck I already have, or a deck I'm building, or a deck I want to build. That's kind of what I chose my list on. So I'm going to kick it off with Redain, God of the Worthy. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white, legendary creature god. It's a 2/3. It has flying and vigilance, and it says snowlands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Non-creature spells your opponents cast with converted mana cost 4 or greater cost 2 more to cast. And this is a double-face card. So the backside is Valkmira, Protector's Shield. It's a legendary artifact for 3 and a white. If a source an opponent controls would deal damage to you, you are a permanent you control, prevent 1 of that damage. And whenever you or another permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 1. So I really want to run this in my Dromoka deck, and I kind of like both sides for it. The creature side, obviously, it's a very efficiently costed flyer with some tax built in. I don't like to run a lot of taxing cards in my deck, but the fact that snow is coming back, and I have a feeling that people are just going to start putting snowlands into their deck just because they're readily available in a standard set. I kind of want to see how much this might hose people over. And on top of that, 4 mana or more to it costs 2 more to cast. I don't run Aura of Silence and Dromoka anymore, but there was a taxing card. So this is definitely going to replace Angel Jubilation, which is another stacks and tax type card I'm already running.
Ooh.
Where I feel like this isn't going to prevent a lot of the decks I've been playing against lately from actually working. This is just going to make them slow them down a bit. And then if I ever need to cast the reverse side, people can't do stuff on my turns, but this will also help prevent them from doing stuff on their turn to my board, whether it's Pathing Dromoka or, Song of the Dryads and something, just helps keep my board alive for a little bit longer, hopefully.
Yep. So speaking of this Redain, I wanted to bring up something that I found interesting with this set. And so I'm actually looking at both versions of this card. The altered versions, to me, actually look like old text, like in a book or something, like lore.
Yeah.
Old painted, like what you would see, like Norse mythology, like these are our legends and that kind of stuff. And here's a painting of what this god is supposedly supposed to look like. And that kind of stuff I find cool with this set.
They've really done some interesting stuff with these alternate frames the last year or so, for sure.
Yep. Now, mistake me if I'm wrong, but we can play any of these cards as a general because they are legendary and still use their flip side, correct? Out of the command zone?
Correct.
Yep.
Your commander tax applies to both sides. So if you were to cast the creature side first as your commander, and then it goes back to the zone and you want to cast it for a second time, but you want to cast the artifact side, you apply the tax to the artifact.
I'm loving this too for our game because it's giving more aspect to the game. Because now there's going to be, instead of like 500 different decks, now there's going to be millions of opportunities with different decks. It's like, I don't even care about the creature. I want the flip side because that's going to be awesome inside of my deck instead.
Yeah, it just adds a lot of fun, weird ways to brew and lets people be creative. And I think that's really good for the format. I totally agree.
What about you, Dana? Where are you starting with?
Okay, so I'm actually just realizing this literally right now as I'm like, that set symbol looks strange. I grabbed a card here that was in one of the Commander Precon decks.
Oh boy.
That are coming out at the same time.
Oh boy.
I have a bunch of those on my list as well, so don't worry. I kind of just included them.
So my pick is Cosmic Intervention for my first card. It is 3 and a white, and it has Foretell. So Foretell is 1 and a white, and then you may pay 2 and exile the card from your hand. So you're going to wind up paying essentially the same mana cost to whether you foretell it or don't. But if a permanent you control we put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn, exile it instead, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So this is a thing we've seen a couple times in the past. Similarly, we have Faith's Reward, which is an instant return to the battlefield all permanents that were put in your graveyard this turn. We have kind of a smaller version of that in Brought Back, where you spend 2 mana instead and just bring 2 things back. The relevant difference here is Faith's Reward costing 4 is a ton of mana. If you want to do some shenanigans or something and like cast a Wrath of God and then bring your stuff back, that means you need to have 8 mana. You know, if you want to really be brutal and cast like a Jackal Hops or something, the amount of mana you need to cast Faith's Reward is just makes it very difficult to do. If you're holding up mana in case somebody else board wipes, you also need to keep 4 free. And that feels terrible if they don't cast a board wipe or something. Additionally, because the permanents hit the graveyard with Faith's Reward, you know, if there's a Leyline of the Void out, or if there's a Rest in Peace out, or even if somebody has just one of those artifacts like Soul Guide Lantern, they can just empty your graveyard out and it doesn't trigger. So there's a lot of ways to kind of render those cards not that great. Brought Back, I actually kind of liked when it was spoiled last year because it's only 2 mana and it makes it way easier to leave mana up. When someone blows up your creature or something, you can still bring 2 big things back. Cosmic Intervention kind of really threads the needle even more perfectly with the same effect. Because you can foretell it and have it sit there, that means you only need to keep up that Brought Back mana. You only need to keep up 2. So when someone board wipes, you're like, fine, my stuff's all coming back, I'm just going to spend 2. And if they don't, it doesn't feel nearly as bad only leaving, 2 mana unused.
Yep.
What's super important, though, is because of the wording, if a permanent would be put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn, exile it instead, and then return it to the battlefield. So there's no chance Leyline of the Void doesn't hit it. It doesn't get hit by Rest in Peace. If someone has a Soul Guide Lantern out, they can't just tap the Lantern and empty your graveyard out. It's just a thing that's going to happen. Now, you don't get a death trigger then, but like white doesn't have that many death triggers, so I don't think that's a huge deal. So that's all great. I think it's a really, really good card at that point. However, if you really then dig deep down into the wording, if a permanent you control would put it to the graveyard from the battlefield at this turn, so that means it lasts all turn. Exile it instead, and then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So that means if you have Cosmic Intervention in play, and you fire it off for your 2 mana, and then you crack a fetch land, well, you go get your land, fetch land gets exiled, comes back in the turn, back into play at the end of your turn, at which point Cosmic Intervention is still working.
Yep.
So you can crack the fetch land again, go get another land, in which case it will trigger again and get exiled. Then that fetch land will come back into play next end step, which is your opponent's end step. So you can essentially get 3 triggers off a fetch land with Cosmic Intervention. At which point you can use it to go get something like Mystic Sanctuary for your 3rd one, to then put Cosmic Intervention back on top of your library and use it all again.
Oh, yeah, I mean, this definitely is tons of combo potential, is what I've been seeing on the Little Blue Bird this week, once this card got previewed, so this is an all-star, I think. Ooh.
Yeah, I think it's really, but even if you're just using it for nothing and like a backup plan, like, okay, I'm just going to have it sit there, and if something goes wrong, if someone board wipes or someone casts a, whatever, forces me to sacrifice all my creatures, or, they come at me with who knows what it would be, the situation would be, you just have this there to save all your stuff. And it's not just creatures, it's all permanents. So it's just a really nice 2 mana way to keep yourself safe. And hey, maybe you'll have the fetch land situation up and you can abuse it a little bit too. It just hits a lot of different axes. It does a bunch of different things, and I think it's going to be a really strong card in a bunch of different decks.
That does sound very strong.
So, Chris, we'll go back to you. What's your number 2 here?
My number 2 is a flip card, like Max brought up in the first one. It is a god flipping into something else. It is Birgi, God of Storytelling. 2 colorless and a red for a 3/3 legendary creature god. It reads, whenever you cast a spell, add red to your mana pool. Until end of turn, you don't lose mana as steps and phases end. It also reads, creatures you control can boast twice during each of your turns rather than once. Now, boast is after this creature attacks, you can trigger the ability to do something fancy, shenanigans, there's so many different abilities. I'm not going to list any of them. The real reason I chose this card is for the flip side. The flip side is called Harnfell Horn of Bounty. It is 4 colorless and a red for a legendary artifact. This card reads, discard a card. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. That right there is... I don't even know what to relate it to. There's the red enchantment from Khans that's like that, but you get 2 cards for 1. I mean, you're discarding a card to do that, and you can do that as many times as you want. Red has always needed, some sort of phenomenal card draw source, and I think right here, this is just one of those sources that's just, let's just start pitching lands out of my hand to flip cards, to play a land, to play a creature, and, just continuously do this until, you get your board set up. I find that card actually extremely powerful, and this is probably my number one card that I want to pick up myself.
Well, I had Bergie on my list. Did you by chance, Max?
I don't play red.
No, but Chris, I'm totally with you. The fact that you can pick what you need more, like, okay, I'm gonna maybe do a storm. I'm gonna cast 5 spells next turn, and I'm gonna get some red mana to make that way easier. Even if you're not doing a true storm effect, if you still I need to do this, and this. This basically functions as a kind of a cost reducer. Every spell you cast add a red. So if you're casting 1 mana spells, you're basically getting them for free, essentially.
Yes.
And if you don't need that, if you're like, I just need some cards because I'm holding 3 lands right now, play the red side of it. You can turn those lands into value. And it's not a once per turn effect or a tap effect. You just do it.
Yeah.
I find that extremely powerful in red. It's probably the best card draw spell I've seen come out of red in a long time.
I mean, if it was a tap ability, it would still be pretty good. Like if it was tap, discard a card, and exile the top 2, that would still be pretty solid. But the fact that it isn't is amazing.
Yes. I mean, granted, it is 5 mana, but Outpost Siege, I think, is the one enchantment.
Outpost Siege is 4.
It's 4, yeah. So you're spending 1 more, but you're getting 2 cards for 1 instead of 1 at your upkeep. So, I mean...
And if you're pitching a land, you don't care.
No, I read this card and I was just shocked. I was like, wait, what? Isn't this supposed to be like green or something, because everybody hates red and they think green's the best color. But, ugh.
Yeah, super, super good. I was just, with you, Chris, I was kind of surprised. I was like, am I reading this wrong? Or is this like a bad translation or something?
Yeah, I had to reread it a couple times too. I'm like, am I missing? I even looked up rules on it. I'm like, am I missing something in here that I'm not seeing? But no, it's phenomenal.
All right, Max, what do you have here for your number 2?
My number 2 is Righteous Valkyrie. This is a 3 mana, 2 and a white angel cleric. It's a 2/4 and it has flying. And it says, whenever another angel or cleric enters the battlefield under my control, I gain life equal to that creature's toughness. And then as long as I have at least 7 life more than my starting life total, creatures I control get +2/+2. Again, it's a very efficiently costed flyer with amazing upside. I actually did the math in Dramoka. I think I run 13 angels in that deck already, so this just kind of slides right in, and that's just a dragon leading an army of angels is what that deck has turned into.
I'm loving all the angels in the set. It's pretty good.
I love that we get black angels in this set.
And low-costed ones. They're not all like 9 drops. There's some that are actually like, that's a good angel for 3 mana. That's a good angel for 4 mana. Like, your curve isn't totally messed up either. So that's really cool. Yeah, I'm a fan of that one, Max. I'm going to put it in my wife's angel deck for sure.
Nice.
So, my next one here is Pact of the Serpent. It's black, and a colorless, so 3 mana for a sorcery. Choose a creature type, and target player draws X cards and loses X life, where X is the number of creatures of the chosen type they control. So if you're in a tribal deck, that's a pretty good draw spell. There's a couple of these kind of similar effects in blue. There's Distant Melody, which is 1 more at 4, where you choose a creature and draw a card for each permanent you control of that type. So there's a couple of things that exist right now. Black has one called Minions Murmurs that costs 4, where you just draw a card for each creature you control, period, and lose a life. But the fact that this is only 3 makes it way easier to cast. And there's a couple of other things I want to note about it. It's targeted for 1. So if you are somebody who, obviously if you're playing a tribal deck, that's great. But if you happen to be playing against someone with some kind of a tribal deck and they're like, oh, they've got 11 of this, 11 zombies in play and they're at 10 life, you can just use it to kill somebody. Having that option is very, very nice. And the other thing I will point out that's nice about it, because it's only 3 mana, you don't necessarily need to be playing it in a tribal deck. I wouldn't say you should put it in just any black deck, but there's a lot of decks that aren't tribal that still accidentally make a bunch of creatures of one certain type. It doesn't do any good for Max's Dramoka deck, for example, but he mentioned how he happens to have just 12 angels in the deck already. There's a lot of decks that kind of function that way, where even if it isn't a tribal deck necessarily, you happen to have a bunch of this kind of creature in there, or you happen to make quite a few zombie tokens, or, the original Teysa Karloff happens to make a bunch of spirits, and Max's Regnan Krav deck makes, is it warriors it makes, Max?
Warriors, Regna makes warriors, correct.
So you have warriors that your commander's just making warrior tokens. So okay, maybe you're not going to draw 25 cards off it or something, but you look down and be like, oh, I just so happen to have 3 warriors in play. 3 mana, draw 3, that's pretty decent. There's a lot of decks and a lot of situations where you just accidentally get probably enough value out of this to justify spending 3 mana, and then once in a while you're just going to kill somebody. I think it's a amazing card in a tribal deck, and it's a pretty good card in a bunch of other decks. So we will throw it back to you, Chris. What is your number 3 here?
My number 3 is the new Tormenting Voice. This card is called Seize the Spoils. For 3 mana, you get a sorcery that reads, as an additional cost of the spell, discard a card. Draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. I looked at this card in the aspect of your Tormenting Voice, like I was saying. 2 mana, discard a card, draw 2 cards, sorcery speed, basic stuff. This is 1 more mana, but it gives you a treasure token. I was thinking about this for a long time with Commander, and while, we try to be efficient, and 2 mana is better than 3, the way that I look at this is 3 mana in Commander is kind of consequential, but you get the treasure out of it. So if you needed that extra 1 mana, you have it right away again. If you don't, that sits there for something else. I mean, you could use it later down the line. You could be playing a deck where you have that stupid enchantment that you create 20 treasures and you win the game, and this card could be what you needed for that. Anything in the long run, the treasure token just helps you. So, I mean, it doesn't have to, you don't have to be as efficient as possible, as long as you have something that's backing you back up. And that's why I like this card. I'm actually been contemplating I might try switching out all my Tormenting Voices for this card just to see how it plays and see if it's as good as I think it might be.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're in like some kind of a Boros deck that cares about artifacts, a Kiri Lineslinger gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Well, why not have things that make treasure tokens in there as well, just to get extra gas out of it on your commander? It essentially makes your commander +1/+1.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of situations where like having a token or, things that care about sacrifice or whatever, like there's a lot of situations where that's just a little bit of useful value already on a card that was already pretty good.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, that 1 more extra mana, I don't think it's going to hurt you in Commander. I really don't. The way the format's been going, people aren't so... Unless you're playing CEDH, then I understand 100%. But if you're not, this should be just perfect, swap out.
Yeah, I like it. Max, back to you.
So Dana's brought up a couple cards from the Kaldheim Commander Precons, and I'm just going to give a shout out to the entire elf deck because I was building, I started an Abomination of Llanowar deck when Commander Legends came out, and the first elf that got previewed during preview season, I'm like, well, I might as well put a pause on this because I have a feeling I'm going to get a lot of elves in Kaldheim, which is 100% true. So
you got an elf planeswalker? I mean, come on.
I did, and that is the next card on my list is Tyvar Kell.
Heck yeah.
Tyvar Kell is a planeswalker. It's 2 and 2 green for a 3 loyalty planeswalker. He has a static ability of tap. Elves you control have tap, add black mana. And he has 3 activated abilities. His +1 says put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target elf, untap it, and it gains Death Touch until end of turn. He has an activated ability for 0 to create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token, and his ultimate at -6. You get an emblem with whenever you cast an elf spell, it gains haste until end of turn, and you draw 2 cards. I was originally going to run Freyleys in my deck, just because it makes the elf tokens. This is just kind of better, strictly for the static, because now I can really tune my land base to be more forest heavy than swamp heavy, because if I get him out, all my elves are going to essentially tap for black, which is great. And plus, look at that awesome championship belt he's wearing in the art. Like, he's the champion of the elves. You gotta like that. So I really like this planeswalker. I like that it's giving elves another elf matter planeswalker like Freyleys, and because the Nissas really don't do that. So I really like seeing tribal support here.
Yeah, that's always kind of one of the problems with planeswalkers is how do you not make them kind of just generic creatures that or generic value generators? Like, how do you give them kind of an identity? And they've kind of struggled with that. Chandra deals direct damage for the most part. They've kind of figured that out a little bit. Elspeth used to make tokens and still does. Gideon used to turn into a creature, but they've had a tough time to a degree giving planeswalkers an identity. And this is an easy one. This person just interacts with elves. Like, that's a really clear-cut, simple thing to do. And if you're playing elves, that's a really, really useful thing to have.
Oh, it's for sure. I love how they dedicated a planeswalker to a specific tribe.
Yep.
A lot, like Dana was saying, a lot of them are so generic and they do like a certain thing based on their color combinations or whatnot. But this one only deals with elves. Like, I mean, if you're playing this in any just green deck, I don't think it's going to do anything for you.
But if you're playing elves, it's excellent.
Yes.
I really like the emblem. It says elf spell because there's a bunch of tribal sorceries or tribal instants from the Lorwyn block that are tribal elf. So I can cast one of those and draw 2 cards.
And there's a couple of different of the tribal things we got this time that read the same way. Reflections of Lajara does the same thing. So I will be curious to see if I don't think they'll bring back the tribal card type for standard. I would highly doubt. But, we saw a lot of really weird things show up in Modern Horizons 2 last time, and elves are a archetype that does show up in Eternal formats. I wonder if we don't see things like some actual old school tribal spells pop up that have the subtype tribal, if people don't remember what that was. Kind of like there's legendary things. There was a short period of time where you had like a tribal elf type of spell, tribal goblins. There was a couple different ones. I wonder if we don't see that come back in like a special Modern Horizons 2 kind of environment too.
That'd be cool.
That'd be dope.
So, yeah, for sure. All right, my next one here is Mystic Reflection. It is a blue instant for 1 and a blue. It does have foretell, so you can foretell it for 2, obviously, then just the casting cost for foretell is 1, so it costs 1 more total, but on your turn it only costs a single to use. Choose target non-legendary creature. The next time 1 or more creatures or planeswalkers enter the battlefield this turn, they enter as copies of the chosen creature.
Yeah.
So this works 2 ways. It can kind of work like a counter spell. So if someone casts their Elish Norn and you're like, oh, I don't have a way to stop that, so I'm just going to make it into a Llanowar Elf. Like, it's a way to turn a really nasty thing that you don't want to come into play into the weakest thing on the board. You can also take it the other direction and turn your Llanowar Elf into someone else's Elish Norn. Or even better, if you're playing a deck that makes a bunch of tokens, you can turn all of your tokens that are coming into play because you just cast this thing that's going to, put 7 tokens in the battlefield. Turn those all into, probably not Elish Norns, but someone else's Avenger of Zendikar or whatever. So it has a lot of flexibility. It can kind of be a counter spell for a scary creature. It can upgrade the creature you're casting into the best thing on the board, or sometimes upgrade a whole bunch of things into the best thing on the board if you are playing that kind of deck. It's got a lot of versatility, I think, and especially for 1 mana after you foretell it, that's really, really solid.
That sounds way too broken. This is why I hate blue. Blue gets all these weird shenanigan cards.
Blue does everything.
Because they can do so many different options.
Yeah.
I can't wait to sacrifice a Hangerback Walker with like 5 counters on it and make it a copy of like a Wormcoil engine. All those tokens.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of situations this is going to wind up. This is the kind of card that it's going to be really useful, and once in a while you get a fantastic story out of it because you're like, oh, this person did this thing, and I had Mystic Reflection sitting there with 1 mana.
I do like if you really want that big play, though, it requires a lot of setup because it is only the next time. So,
right.
In my Psymaster Thopterus deck, it's not going to turn every Thopter I make in a turn into something that's going to make the next one. So I do like that it is somewhat controlled.
Yeah, the only way you can get the multiple creatures off it is if you're doing something like Call the Coppercoats or something where like you're casting a thing that makes 6 tokens. Or Avenger Zendikar coming into play makes a token for every land you control. You could hit all of those tokens with this and make them all into other Avenger of Zendikars, which would then all make their own tokens. Disgusting. But yeah, it does require, it's not like automatically going to be busted, but once in a while you're going to hit that perfect situation where it's super gross. And we'll tell a story here on games we played, and everyone will be like, oh my God. So I love cards like that generate those moments. Okay, Chris, back to you. What do you have?
My next one is another legendary creature. This one is actually an uncommon. It is Carder, Doomscourge. 2 colorless, black and red, for a legendary demon berserker who is a 4/3. It reads, when Carder, Doomscourge enters the battlefield until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able and attack a player other than you if able. So pretty much what it's saying is, it's goading is pretty much what it is, built onto a creature. It also reads, whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This card right here, I saw this and I was like, oh yeah, more Moga shenanigans. I need this card. It's Also, in general, I think it's just a good card. The ability to goad, so all the creatures are attacking. They start attacking at other people. They're like, well, I have to attack anyway, so I might as well block. Well, they're going to die. And then now you got stuff, triggering life loss and you're gaining life. Overall, I think the value of this card is phenomenal. And it's an uncommon, which I'm absolutely loving that they're doing legendary creatures in the uncommon slot.
Not just legendary creatures, quite good ones, and ones that are very interesting. And goad is a really cool ability, I think.
It is.
It breaks through that lull sometimes you get where like people have played 3 or 4 creatures and you're like, oh, no one has any flyers and no one can really attack profitably right now. I mean, it makes everyone figure something out. Like, well, I can't help it. I gotta swing. Like it shakes up games and keeps things from getting stagnant. I like the mechanic a lot, and a commander that gives you that right there repeatedly in the command zone, I think is really good.
I'm loving this card. I love the art on it. Lightning bolts all over the place. And it looks like a Minotaur when you look at it, even though it's a demon. But hey, if you want to play it as Minotaur Tribal, I would be right with you for that one.
All right, Max, what's your next one here?
My next one is an artifact, and it's Cosmos Elixir. This is a 4-mana artifact that says at the beginning of your end step, draw a card if your life total is greater than your starting life total. Otherwise, gain 2 life. I have a lot of lifelink decks, Dramoka, Regna, and Krav, so if I get to draw a card just for doing what the deck does, I'm all for that. Plain and simple. That's all I can say about this card.
So is this another Dramoka include for you, Max?
I'm going to try to find a spot in Dramoka for it. It's for sure going in like Regna and Krav, just because that's all about life gain, even more so than Dramoka, I think. So
yeah, I mean, you get a chance to draw a card in a life gain deck. You're getting more life gain triggers. I was eyeballing this for maybe Veto as well. Just, it's because it's 2 life and 2 damage to somebody, so that's always kind of useful. Yeah, it's just a really interesting card, and it's a fun design space as well. I think they've gotten very creative with these random artifacts the last few years too. So I like this one. My next one here is an enchantment. Reflections of Litjara, which I actually mentioned before as one that also could interact with Tribal. It is a 4 and a blue. When it enters battlefield, you choose a creature type, and whenever you cast a spell of the chosen type, copy that spell. And a copy of a permanent spell becomes a token. So for the most part, particularly in Standard, you're just going to cast an elf and it'll make a copy of that elf. However, if you are playing in a commander deck and you have some of those older tribal spells, it will also copy those, which is one of the reasons I mentioned that before when Max was talking about things that copy tribal spells. This does as well. If you are playing tribal and you have access to blue, this just copies. It requires no intervention on your part. You don't need to spend mana to do so. Like there's things like Flame Shadow Conjuring that in red that when you cast a creature spell, you can copy it by paying mana. There's a few different ways to do that. This doesn't require that. As long as you are playing something of that creature type and you cast it, it's just going to make you a copy. So, I was looking at this. My wife has a 3-color Bant Angels deck. Angels tend to be fairly expensive anyway. We got a few cheap ones, but they tend to be big beaters that cost 5 mana. I'd be okay getting a copy of Baneslayer when you cast Baneslayer, or, even getting a copy of Sarah Angel if you cast Sarah Angel if you're running. That's a pretty good deal. But it doesn't even have to be a big beater. If you're just going to get a free copy of whatever Merfolk or whatever rogue you cast, I think that's a pretty good piece of value as well when it doesn't require you to have to keep a piece of mana up to, make a copy or something. So I think it's a really, really solid card. And the one downside is I was looking at my Sphinx deck with this. I have 8 legendary Sphinxes in that deck. So the copies would just die.
Oh no.
That's unfortunate as a downside. But if you're playing with things that have an ETB too, if you have a commander of some sort that has a really good enter the battlefield ability, maybe you don't care if that token dies. If you're going to cast your commander often enough that it's going to just trigger that second enter the battlefield ability, that's maybe worthwhile doing as well, even if it isn't a true tribal deck. If you just have a deck that has a commander with a really good enter the battlefield ability, there are situations that might be worthwhile also, just to get that trigger, even if the token dies. So it's a neat card, and I'm a fan of it. We will go back to Chris for your last. Yeah, it is a shenanigans card for sure. What is your last one here, Chris?
My last one is a card called Birthing Pod. It's 3 colorless and a green. No. So this is actually isn't on my list, but I wanted to discuss it. And that is Pyre of Heroes, which literally is Birthing Pod for tribal decks.
Mm-hmm.
I saw this card and I'm not sure if it's going to do anything in other formats. It might. So pretty much what it does is it's 2-mana artifact, tap 2, sacrifice a creature, search your library for a creature card that shares a creature type with the sacrificed creature and has a converted mana cost equal to 1 plus that creature's converted mana cost. Put it on the battlefield and shuffle your library. Activate this ability only anytime you can activate a sorcery, which is literally Birthing Pod, except for it has to share a creature type. So I'm curious about this. I would love to hear feedback from people who have looked at this card, if there's anything that they've seen in Modern or Legacy or even Standard going forward, if this could become the new toolbox card for, like replacing the Birthing Pod decks. It's very interesting to me. I wanted to bring it up quick. But the card I want to talk about for Commander is Esika, God of the Tree. This card jumped out at me hard because I am currently building a 5-color deck. The reason this jumped out at me is, although this front side of this card, which is a god, which costs 3 mana, 1 colorless, and 2 green for a 1/4 god, the backside is a 5 mana legendary artifact. It covers all 5 manas of the spectrum.
Enchantment.
Now for the front side, is it an enchantment? An enchantment.
Yes.
Pardon me. Thank you, Max, for correcting me. Front side has Vigilance. It has tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. It also reads, other legendary creatures you control have Vigilance and have tap, add 1 mana of any mana to your mana pool. So right there, your legends are getting all that fun shenanigans, whatever. I really don't care about that. That doesn't bother me at all. It's the other side that reads, at the beginning of your upkeep for this legendary enchantment, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest at the bottom of your library in a random order. I think this card cheats the game. That's what I'm thinking is going on here. It seems so powerful that, just slap this out there. And I mean, this could be your 5-color commander right here, because, it's on the front of the card. Hey, you have to follow that color pie, all that fun stuff. And just put it out there and just start slapping cards in for free at the beginning of your upkeep. Super powerful. I don't know if people are actually going to play it or not. I know I want to get one and play it in my 5-color deck I'm building. So we'll see how it goes going forward.
All right, Max, what do you have here for your last entry?
My last entry, and this might be on your list, Dana. It's a Replicating Ring. It's a 3-mana snow artifact, and it taps for 1 mana of any color, but it also says, at the beginning of your upkeep, put a night counter on Replicating Ring. Then if it has 8 or more night counters on it, remove all of them and create 8 colorless snow artifact tokens named Replicating Ring, and they all tap to add 1 mana of any color. This is similar to the one we got back in Zendikar Rising, where you could pay the kicker to make a bunch of copies of it.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a little slower, but I think it's something that is going to catch the table off guard, because it's like, oh, there's 7 counters on that. I didn't realize that you put the 8th one on and now you have 8 of them, or 9 technically. You have 9 total mana rocks. So in any artifact deck where, your creatures get buffed for the number of artifacts you have, just having this stick around buffs them all by 8 once you get that trigger to go off. So I just think it's super cool.
Yeah, I think this card's going to be really good in any deck that's proliferating too. And proliferate the counters on it, get it off faster. In my opinion, this card probably, and people are probably going to yell at me, but if you're still playing, what is it, Darkseal Ingot, this card should just straight up replace it. The ability to create more of them, it does the same thing. It may not be indestructible, but 3 mana to create any color of mana, same thing as Darkseal Ingot. It just doesn't, have indestructible. So, which personally for me, it wouldn't matter if I have the option of making, 8 of these things.
Yeah, I do think the proliferate is a big deal. I do think you have to have a way to cheat somehow the 8 counters rather than hoping you just get the 8 on it. But it's not like it's not good along the way. If you don't get 8 counters on it, it's still essentially, it's still a better manolith, right?
Yes.
So yeah, it's a fun design, and I think if you are in the right deck that has a bunch of ways to do things with those counters, it's going to be amazing.
And it's also nice that the copies, you'd think the copies would enter tapped or something, and they don't. So you hit your upkeep.
Yeah, that's super cool.
You put the 8th one on, you make 8 more. And I just have to say, why is the art of the token better than the art on the card?
Maybe somebody at the print shop got them mixed up.
Maybe.
That's what we'll assume. All right, well, we'll go to my last one here, and I had to pick this card. I don't think it probably qualifies as being something amazing for Commander, but I don't care. I'm going to talk about it anyway. And that's Finn the Fangbearer.
Oh, boy.
1 and a green for a uncommon legendary creature, human warrior. It's a 1/3 with Death Touch, but that's not the important part. The important part here is it says, whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. So poison is back in standard.
Yeah, buddy.
And what's kind of neat about this too is because of the way it's worded, if a creature with death touch just deals damage, you get 2 poison counters. That stacks with infect, so it doesn't like override infect existing. So you can have something with infect and this, as well as we had a keyword back in Time Spiral that was poisonous, which means when a creature does damage, they get 2 poison counters. There was a Virulent Sliver and an enchantment called Snake Cult Initiation. So there's 2 cards that do it, basically. But those would stack as well. So technically speaking, you could have one creature that had poisonous, had infect, and gave you 2 poison counters from Finn the Fangbearer.
Yep. I wonder if they're doing this to test the waters, because Infect is there's a cult of group of people that love Infect. It's a big meta in Legacy. It's a big meta, in Modern, all that stuff. So I wonder if they're testing the waters to see if they can get those groups of people who love those decks more cards for their decks, so it doesn't feel like they're leaving them out, but not actually break it because they don't like Infect. They don't want to reprint it, anything like that. So why don't we try something different so we can get you guys more cards and see if it's anything that we can do in the future?
Yeah, that's the thing about poison is like it's a flat. You get 2 poison counters. Doesn't matter if the creature's if Finn is a 1/3 or if it's a 20/20.
Yep.
You're still getting the 2 poison counters. So it's much more difficult to break than it is something like Infect. And we mentioned this with Tribal, how we were curious if the way the wording was set up was to see more maybe Tribal stuff coming in Modern Horizons 2 or something. The same thing could be true here. We could be getting this poisonous thing or these poison counters, and we could well see some more poison stuff show back up in Modern Horizons 2 as well for Modern. So I'll be curious to see if that winds up being a thing.
Now, did you find what card you're going to replace this with?
I have...
Because I know this is going in your deck. Because
it is absolutely going in my Glissa deck. Chevelle, Bane of Monsters, who is the 2-mana guy that has Death Touch and puts a bounty counter on the creature. When the creature dies, it's fine, but it never it takes too long to set up and make work. So that's an easy swap because they're both 2-mana as well. So it's definitely going in the deck.
Because I know that we have discussed your deck before, and you've always brought up that sometimes it's just hard to win with it. You don't have a clear-cut win pattern, and you jam this card on the field and you have 12 Death Touchers, and we're just looking at you going, oh no.
Yeah, it's just one more way to actually kind of win a game. So yeah, that's I found nice to get that for that deck as well. So, and it's also relatively safe. It's Modern Green. Like if you want to build this as a poison deck too, it's mono green. You've got a limited amount of things you can put in the deck. I think it's a relatively safe card. As a commander, people aren't going to suddenly start doing crazy things with that, I don't think.
Yep. But
it'll be useful in my deck for sure. And I just thought it was super cool to see poison come back.
I saw a lot of cards in the set that I could replace cards in your guys' decks. It was crazy. I was looking at them. I'm like, they get all the good stuff. How come I never get any good red things? And then I found that red artifact, and I'm like, I'm just going to shut up now.
I'm good to go. That's all I need. Just need the one. So overall, what's everyone's, and I can start with you, Chris, what are your thoughts on Kaldheim, having seen all these cards now?
I'm in love with it. As I was looking through this, and I keep looking through it, there's so many cards that I want that I actually might buy sealed product this time instead of just buying the singles.
Oh, nice.
Because there's so much that I might as well start cracking the packs, because there's commons, uncommons, rares, mythics, everything. It's just It's really good set overall, and I love how they stuck true to the theme of Norse stuff. We saw the vehicles like I was predicting that we'd see, we see there's a funeral boat and other long boats and stuff like that. So I'm loving the set overall.
How about you, Max? What are your thoughts here?
I think back when we did the set review for, I think, Zendikar Rising is when I kind of said this was the standard set that started to really feel the power creep of in EDH, like they're really designing for EDH.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was wrong. I think I feel 1,000 times worse with Kaldheim in that aspect. Like every card, every legendary feels like it's going to kind of change the game, good or bad. Some cards I think are not great for the game, and the people online probably know what cards I'm talking about without mentioning them. And some are great for the game. I love the modular double face cards. I like these versions over the lands we got in Zendikar Rising, or like the spell lands. I like that it's artifacts or enchantments. So I really like that they keep it exploring that design space. So overall, I like the set. I just think we're really starting to see the power creep even more so than we did Zendikar Rising or even Commander Legends.
Yeah. You know what we didn't discuss is the new mechanic of those enchantments called the runes, where you can enchant something and get like different effects depending on what you enchant. It's quite amusing.
Yeah, the runes it felt a little bit like it was like cartouches that we had way back in Theros. Yeah, but I like the design in the runes a lot. Like I think they're pretty limited. I don't know.
I think they were designed for limited.
Yeah, but I think it's a fun design too. I liked it a lot.
They brought back the fetchable snowlands, the dual snowlands. I like that too. They may come into play.
Those are really good.
Yeah, they're still fetchable lands. So.
Yeah, those are really solid for commons too. Yeah, excellent.
I actually thought about this, and I'm gonna run this past you guys. I think they did that due to the simple fact of so many cards require snow, and when you're drafting in a set like this, you can't use snow basics, just random snow basics out of the box. You have to draft your snow lands out of the packs. So if you put more into a set, then it's more often you can draft them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would assume that's the case too. So it makes it much easier to have when you're doing your pre-release or whatever. Yeah, but I mean they're going to be good in Commander. I've got at least one deck that will run one of them. So
yeah, I have a feeling people are going to be running a whole bunch of snow. But then again, Modern Horizons came out and you had all the snow that was reprinted, and those were easy to get your hands on. And I honestly didn't see a whole lot of people playing them. So
I also think the reason though for that, Chris, is it was a supplemental set mainly made for Modern. You know, you're not going to get your standard people buying those packs unless they wanted something specific for EDH or something, where this is a standard set, and for the areas where the LGSs are holding FNM and stuff like that, you're going to see them way more often just because it's a standard product. It's going to get cracked by every store just for product.
Yeah, they're cheaper packs, cheaper boxes, all that stuff. So did we ever figure out why Vorinclex is on this plane?
We did not get an official reveal, but I think it's implied that he was sent through to kind of scout things out by Tezzeret through the planar bridge. That's now part of him. Because there was a little brief excerpt from about all of the legends, and Vorinclex went through however he got here, all the flesh on his body was destroyed, which is what happens when you go through the planar bridge, which is why they had the Lazotep covered guys when Bolas used it. So basically he was lying in a heap in the woods of just bones and metal until some random creature came along and sniffed at the pile, and then he sucked all the flesh onto himself and absorbed a bunch of other animals till he had flesh again, and then went on a rampage.
Yeah, because I mean, when I'm looking through this whole set, it's like Vorinclex he sticks out. He's not supposed to be here. There's something going on. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but did you guys see the altered version in the Phyrexian text?
Yeah, that was super cool.
Yeah.
But then it looks like he gets killed. I think one of the Kaya cards shows her killing him.
Interesting.
So it'd be interesting to see where that all goes too. I also wonder if it isn't a storyline where Elish Norn's basically he's a pain in my butt and we need to see if this works. So it's kill two birds with one stone. Either we see if this portal works or he gets killed. Either way, it's a win-win.
Yep.
So that's what I'm guessing we find out. But
I am super curious on the lore for that. Anyone listening, if you guys know anything or you hear something, feel free to hit me up on Twitter, or if you're in our Slack, put it up there, tag me in it so I know, because this is one of the things I'm really curious about, because I want to see what the future's bringing for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doom. It's bringing Doom, Chris.
If
it's Nicol Bolas again? Or are you talking about Eldrazi? I mean, what's coming?
all three. They're bringing it's the the evil, the Sinister Six, Eldrazi, Bolas, Phyrexians. It's perfect.
Oh, they created their own League of Evil Heroes, or what is that in the DC world? I don't know what it is.
I couldn't think of it either, so I went to Sinister Six.
All right, that is going to wrap up this show for this week. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMBRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We will be back next week with another show. Until then, I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.